Hi guys, great day here with the Scrivener's Hall hard mode guide. This video is going to be going over the mechanics for all of the bosses. And before we get started, I'm going to be giving you guys a little bit of a rundown on our group, our composition, and the sets that we are using. When we're doing dungeons, we always have a tank and a healer and 2 damage dealers. A lot of the newer DLC dungeons, especially, have a lot of really hard heal checks, so we always like to have a healer in group to help us get through those heal checks. I am on a Dragon Knight tank. I also have been swapping to an Arcanist tank for a lot of the newer content because I really like the class play and I really like the shield stacking on a lot of the fights. Our healer is generally a Warden healer. We really like the skill set that the Warden brings, including the major resolve for the group and the toughness for the group as well. We also have 2 damage dealers. In this POV, we've got a heavy attack Sork and a Templar. But you can definitely do this content on any class that your group feels comfortable with. If you have fun, that's the most important part. And if there's a class you like playing that makes it more fun, that's what I would recommend bringing. For this particular run, I am in Turning Tide and Tremor Scale for some additional penetration since we do have some people in medium armor, as well as War Machine for the first 2 bosses, and then I swapped to Saxaliel's Champion for the last boss. Our healer is in either Olo or SPC and in Pillagers. Another good setup that you can use is either SPC or Olo and Powerful Assault on your healer, as well as Crypt Cannon's Vestments to give more ulti generation. Now, for this first boss, as we're about to go in, every damage dealer is going to want to make sure that they have a self-heal. The reason being that they are going to need to leave and go into the stacks at various parts during the fight. They are going to want to have a self-heal because there is going to be outgoing damage during this phase, and they're going to want to make sure that they can heal their way through it. I would recommend having your damage dealers divide the room, 1 person going left and 1 person going right, because you'll see in just a moment they're going to need to go and look for books. Now for the most part, when we're fighting the boss, this is a bit of a stack and burn fight. We're doing damage, and then every 25% the boss is going to summon a book. That book will cause a mechanic to occur on each player. The boss is also going to do a port mechanic that is generally handled by me and the healer. Now here, the boss is about to summon the first book. This particular book is a red book. That means that there's a mechanic that causes a ghost person to be summoned for each player that needs to be interrupted. You can see the little red lines that shoot out. That is leading the DPS, or the damage dealers, to the books that are in the stack that they need to go and collect. Now, after they collect their book, they come back, and you can see here's the first instance of the port mechanic. It summons 2 green circles, I get into one, and our healer gets into the other. It's very important that you only have 1 person in each of those circles, and it's very important that there's somebody in each of the circles. If nobody gets in the circles, a bomb goes off, and everybody dies. Now the next book that's been summoned is the yellow book. The yellow book means that there is going to be a little ghost figure that needs to be blocked. Again, everybody's going to have their own, and they're going to need to block it. The last book that is summoned is a green book. That causes a little circle to show up, and you can see as it fills up, you just need to roll it. If you don't roll it, you get a nasty knockback, and it's not good. When we're doing this fight, we have found that it works best to do the first 2 books. Everybody goes and collects the first 2 books, and then after that, we stay and we burn through the damage on the last boss. The reason being he only has about 1.2 million health left, and our group can burn through that fairly quickly, so the damage doesn't have enough time to ramp up too bad before we can kill him. So especially when we're on a trifecta push, we tend to just burn through that last book. Now, you may have noticed that there is a small blue book off in the corner of that fight. That blue book is an optional additional hard mode that you can do as well. If somebody activates the blue book, it makes that hard mode just that much harder. Everything hits harder, everything just hurts a lot more. There's going to be a lot more outgoing damage during those book phases while the DPS have sort of run off to go and get the books. And it's just makes everything a little bit harder on everybody. I wouldn't recommend doing that blue book if you're going to be doing a trifecta push in here, but there is a separate achievement that goes with activating that blue book, so at some point your group may want to take that on as well. Now heading into the next boss, You can see the ad pulls are pretty standard, there's nothing special here, but you can see that there's little bugs that show up on the ground. These are going to be important for the next part of the fight. When you run over these little bugs and you squish them, they do give you a speed boost. But the next boss is actually going to be summoning these little bugs as part of the fight mechanic itself. So for the next boss, the DPS aren't going to be going off. Everybody's going to be staying pretty together. And there's going to be a few different phases of the fight. DPS are going to want to make sure that they swap to an ultimate that has a lot of cleave. Even for Arcanists, we tend to use Destro ultis. I would recommend the same for a Sorc as well. Now at the start of this fight, the tank is going to want to pull the boss over to the side of the room. The reason being that the boss is going to port around several times during the fight, and every time he ports, he leaves behind a very large AoE that is going to fill up with lava. If you're not careful about your placement right from the start, then it's going to make it very difficult to continue to move around the room the way that you need to, because the arena is going to fill up with lava pretty quickly. After his first port, he's going to both summon some little bugs, and there's also going to be a laser that follows each player. You want to make sure that you're not stacking these with other players, and everyone is going to need to kite them until the laser beam mechanic ends. After that, the boss is going to do the rest of his mechanics, including summoning the other bugs. Those bugs will merge into some broodlings. He's going to do a heavy attack, and then there's going to be a tether mechanic. Each player is going to get a red tether. You can see it about to start right now, and you need to roll that tether mechanic twice. If you don't get the roll dodge, then a dot is going to be on that player that they're going to need to get healed through, and at the end of that dot, it's going to summon a little green blob that does a lot of damage and is also really going to drain the stam from your tank. Now you can see that there's all these broodlings around as well. Generally, I'm not taunting them to bring them in, but our group does stack right kind of between the boss's first leg and second leg on the side. The reason being that stacked together, all of those broodlings are going to come in on their own, and then we can alternate ultis to kill them and burn them down pretty quickly. Now you can see here the boss is ported again, and he's gone into the middle. When he goes into the middle, he sucks everybody in. For this, you want to make sure that number one, you're out of the middle when he starts this mechanic, and number two, that you are far enough back and far enough away from lava that when he sucks you in, he doesn't drop you in a lava pool at the end. Now again, you can see that he's continuing to do the rest of his mechanics. We've got the tether again, but there's also little fireballs that are shooting out. Those are from the broodlings. That's why it's important that everybody stack together. You want to stack in a place where the healer can both be healing and giving synergies to the tank, as well as healing the damage dealers as well, but also stack together so that those broodlings naturally come in and we can alternate our big cleave AoE ultis that will help to burn them down. Now towards the end of the fight, he also summons an Iron Atronach. This Iron Atronach, we found the best way to deal with it was to kind of ignore it. And so what we do is I make sure that I get a taunt on it, we hold it in the cleave, if it dies, great, but really we're keeping our damage on the boss. As long as everybody is stacked together, this fight really isn't too bad. But if people get too spread out and they aren't burning down the pixies with alternating ultis, it can get pretty difficult, and it can get very hard on the sustain, because every single one of those little broodlings are going to do kind of a lot of damage that just ramps up with more of them out, and they're also going to be draining your stam as the tank because they're going to be shooting out little fireballs and just generally making everybody's life a nuisance. Now, before the last boss, you'll see that I swapped to Saxaleel's champion. The reason being that it's very important for the tank to shield stack on the last boss, and we'll go over why once we actually start to see some of the boss mechanics. It's also going to be very important for the group to be well coordinated and to be able to work together in terms of stacking and positioning. Now on the last fight, there's a few different mechanics that happen. For the first part of the fight, you're going to be in 3 different arenas, and in the first arena, you're going to be fighting a very large spider. So sorry in advance if you've got arachnophobia, because there's a lot of spiders in this one, and you're fighting a large spider for kind of a long time. In the first arena, we're going to see essentially 2 mechanics. we're going to see some fire AoEs that go out, and we're going to see the spider's enrage mechanic. And after that, once you burn the spider down to 50%, she's going to go back up into the ceiling and the room is going to set on fire. So you have to very quickly move into the second arena. In the second arena, we're going to see the other boss, the person boss, for the first time. And with that person boss, we're going to see some additional mechanics, including a cone that she targets at the tank that leaves little AoEs. We're also going to see the nets that keep players caged, and we're still going to have those ongoing mechanics, including a new addition of a heal check, as well as the large fire AoEs as well. So here I am swapping gear. Now, after you burn the human boss down to about 50%, she leaves and the spider comes back up. And you'll be fighting the spider until she's burned down entirely. And then again, the room is going to set on fire and you're going to have to go into the third arena by way of some fairly narrow bridges. For this fight, I've definitely added some skills that are going to make me a little bit tankier and make it a little bit easier to shield stack. I've swapped from balance to hardened armor because it provides a pretty nice shield. I've also, on my front bar, got igneous shield and defensive stance, and we're actually using defensive stance for the shield and not just the block cost reduction. Now at the start of the fight, we're going to start off again with the spider, and we keep her in that corner where she starts. There's going to pretty quickly be a red target over every player's head. This indicates that there is going to be a fire AoE. You can see the little red target that counts down, and when it gets to 0, that's where the fire AoE is placed. You want to make sure that you stack these as much as possible, and so you can see all of our damage dealers stacked theirs together so that we have as much room in this arena as possible. Shortly after that occurred, you also saw the spider turned bright red. This means that the spider is enraged. When the spider enrages, you have to drag her into the large icy AoE that is summoned by the NPC across the room. You can control it because the NPC is going to summon it at kind of the furthest point away from you. So you can see I'm waiting for it here, boss turns red, I look towards it, and then I drag the spider through. If you do not take the spider into the ice, the boss is going to stay enraged, and every single attack that they do is going to be very, very painful on the tank and can be a one-shot as well. Meanwhile, we're just making sure that we're really careful with the placement of our fire AoEs so that we can keep the room open, and when the boss leaves, we start heading off to the next arena. Now again, for the next arena, we're going to start off fighting the person, and right away you're going to see that we get a stack mechanic, meaning that there's going to be little nets that show up around the damage dealers, and I'm going to get a cone that's pointed at me doing a lot of damage. So here's the net that goes out, and then from there, there's also going to be a heal check on the damage dealers so they spread out and make sure they're not stacked. I've also got the cone going right now. I use a magma to get through it. And that gets us through. If you don't have a magma available, or if you don't have enough shields to just stay in place, then what you're going to want to do is kite that little cone AoE around. You can see here I'm moving, I'm not staying in the AoE as much, and we're kiting it around. You want to keep it as close as possible so that we can keep up damage on the boss. Now here we're going to have another fire AoE, and then DPS are going to be given another stack mechanic, meaning that, so here they are in a heal check, and then soon there's going to be nets that show up around them. Now with the heal check, it's important that you don't stack. It can be a little bit hard to see. You glow bright orange, and then if you're stacked together, it ramps up the damage. With these nets, it's important that you don't leave the net area. The reason being that if you leave and you roll through that netting that shows up around you, everybody inside of that net or that touch that net is going to die. Now we're back to the spider, same mechanics as before, except that now we also have a little spider that shows up, and that little spider is going to suck in the person who is the farthest away from it. So we have our healer back up during that phase so that they can catch the kite from the little spider, and then the damage dealers can burn it down. It's important that the healer has a lot of heals over time and ground heals in that spot so that they can keep whoever is getting dragged in alive while that's occurring. Now it's also important, because we're still going to get this net mechanic during that phase, that all of the damage dealers and the healer stack together. There's no heal check during this phase, so it's okay to be stacked together. And if everybody is stacked together and off to one side, it means that the tank who is, you can see here, I'm controlling the placement of the ice mechanic by keeping the boss moving back to front. But that the tank has a clear pathway to take the spider, once it becomes enraged, straight across over to the ice, and can do so fairly quickly without running the risk of running into the ice. Now, one thing to note here is you can get a net and a fire AoE at the same time. When that happens, everybody wants to move in the same direction. We generally have everybody move to either the left or the right, whatever's closest to the outside of the arena, but you absolutely cannot leave the net area. If you leave the net area, again, everybody's going to die. Now, during this last phase, you see we went across those bridges. Now we're going to be back on the human boss. The additional mechanic here is that she's going to summon meteors, and there's also going to be little rolling rocks that come around. Now, the meteor that was just summoned, we go and we kill the first couple of meteors, but towards the end of the fight, we stop. The reason being that the meteors don't actually do that much damage when they explode, but they will do a knockback, so it's going to be important to block. Now here you can see our damage dealers are currently in the net mechanic, and they're also going to get a heal check as well. So during that phase, they're still inside of the nets, but they're spread out into kind of a diamond formation or a triangle formation so that they can avoid stacking together and avoid the ramping damage from the heal check during that phase. We also have the fire AoEs that are coming out, and you can see the rolling rocks that are showing up around the room. Now, right now, the damage dealers are fighting a meteor. I'm kind of off on my own. I'm kiting my AoEs, and you can see that there's these lines that show up. There's going to come a point at some point where you're probably going to find yourself in one of those lines. When that occurs, it's very important that when that rock reaches you, you block. If you're not blocking, you're going to get flung backwards, and you can actually get flung off of the side of this arena. During this phase as the tank, I am stacking shields every time I get the cone so that I can keep the boss as still as possible. If I have magma armor available as my ulti, I will use that in order to keep the boss entirely stationary, and I can just stand in those little AoEs that are left during this cone mechanic. Now here we block the meteor, you can see it get to 0, it's going to explode. We did actually have somebody get knocked back there, but we got lucky and they were able to stay in the arena and didn't die. So during this phase, again, placement is going to be important. We want to make sure that our healer can heal both the tank, who's getting continuous damage from the heal check, from the boss's attacks, the fire AoEs that are going out, and the cone mechanic, but also able to heal the damage dealers through the heal checks, and that they can stay together for the net mechanic so they don't blow each other up and don't accidentally end up in the boss AoE. So those are the mechanics. Again, placement is going to be very important. You will find that there is going to be an order to the mechanics that you'll find out over time. But good luck and happy dungeoning!